Hey guys, Jason Seixnall here, and coming to you again with another video on my How to Get Better at RuneTerra guide series thing. Today we're going to be covering a very important and crucial skill to really hone if you're looking to play and get better at control decks, and that is when to pass. Passing is a very, very strong mechanic within Legends of Runeterra because both players get to play cards in the same turn. And a lot of maybe newer or more inexperienced players are too scared to pass aggressively when they are the control deck. So this video is going to aim to cover all the grounds, and we're going to have some showcase games in which we'll go through turn by turn and really think about whether or not it is right to pass. So if you are enjoying the series and are learning something new with each video, please give the video a like and a subscribe, or even comment down below just to let me know what you thought of it, and I'd really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. I'm going to keep this guide part of the video pretty short because I think that uh, it's a lot more intuitive when you play in game. And so the focus of this video will definitely be more on the decision-making process within each game. But I'll quickly cover some basics that I feel are really core to the understanding of who and when can you pass. So the first concept here is that if we think of a game as a race between the two different decks, the deck that you're playing and the deck that your opponent's playing, a race to see who can fill up their progress bar the first. And the person who does it first is the winner. And so if we think about it like that, then the player who is ahead of the progress bar can pass. To conceptualize it a little bit more, if we're in a Draven Jinx matchup versus Feel the Rush, which is commonly played with Trundle and Tryndamere, the Draven Jinx deck progresses their bar by spending mana on units, dealing damage to the face, and also by gaining tempo on board. And they have their side win condition of leveling Jinx up and getting the rockets to shoot at your opponent's face. On the other hand, the Feel the Rush deck progresses their bar by surviving each turn, removing the opponent's board with their spells like Avalanche, Ruination, Withering Wail, or they're ramping their mana crystals and progressing towards their win condition, which is Feel the Rush. So there's going to be different board states, and both players are going to have different progress bars turn after turn. And just a precursor here, uh, both decks have the ability in a point in the game to pass. If the aggro Draven Jinx player is so ahead on board, they don't have to progress their bar any further by playing more units in case the opponent is trying to bait them into ruination. So at certain points, it's also likely that the Draven Jinx player should also pass. But now, of course, this passing is more important to the control player because of the idea of initiative and reactivity, which I'll cover in the next slide. Passing, again, like I mentioned, is much more important for the control player because the aggro player uh, doesn't really have the tools to use their mana in a reactive position. By that, I mean they need to be playing units in order to progress their game plan, which is generally to beat you down. So for the control player, you should be asking yourself every turn is that, do I need to be doing anything? And this can be broken down into two simple rules. Rule one is the very simple, who is the beatdown? This is your classic aggro versus control example, where if you aren't the beatdown deck, you are the control deck, then you should always be passing in order to keep reactivity. It should be, do I need to do anything this turn? And if I don't, am I okay with letting the opponent play out their turn? And so you should always pass because you always want to be keeping reactivity. You want your opponent to be developing into your removal. So if you have 4 spell mana banked, the opponent has to think about whether or not they are playing into an avalanche. And the only instance where it's okay to play proactively, it's when you can safely progress your win condition. So if it's at a very late turn and you're either playing like Catalyst or burning 5 mana, then it's probably safe to play Catalyst. But a trap that a lot of players fall into is that it's turn 3, they have 6 spell mana banked, and it's the opponent's attack turn. They pass, and players are inclined to play Catalyst when the opponent can then just play down their 3-drop and get some free damage to face. This is kind of a common trap in which that the control deck, by playing Catalyst, gives up their reactivity because there's a rule that mana kind of relates to reactivity. Rule number 2 is that you should be always keeping your mana up because mana always gives you that reactivity. The control deck should always keep mana up to bluff threats or removals unless the opponent either spends all their mana or you can commit your mana into a useful way in order to win the game on the turn. And so finally, to transition into the showcase matches, I'm going to cover one deck in particular that I think really masters this concept, and that is Go Hard. Even though it's been hit with the nerf, I think Go Hard is kind of the ultimate control deck in a way, because if we think about their game plan again as a progress bar, then they can easily progress their bar by either playing Go Hard in order to get towards their pack your bags, or simply just by drawing cards. On the side condition, they can sometimes outpressure the opponent, or they can even level TF in order to really threaten their win condition even further. But what makes Go Hard such a good deck is that they can easily cast Go Hard, which it costs 1 mana to pass initiative over to the opponent, while even progressing their own game plan and removing tempo from the opponent's side. It's an absolutely ridiculous card and deck concept, in that what's what makes it really, really powerful. On the other hand, it kind of breaks rule 1, which is the who is the beatdown deck, because Go Hard has the potential to really go wide and fast on board, in which cases they're using pack your bags aggressively to really close out games on like turn 7 or 8. In addition, they can instantly flip the switch on a later turn and drop Commander Ladros, and then suddenly they have Pack Your Bags and Doom Beast to really threaten your health total. So while being the ultimate control deck, they can also be adding pressure turn after turn, in which case they have a full board and they play Pack Your Bags, and suddenly they have a full open attack, which makes this deck really, really strong, but also a good example of how to really master this skill. So I've actually played this deck a lot on ladder recently, and I've had a lot of success with it. So I want to share some of the matches I've had and kind of go over the decision points that really separate, a good Go Hard player versus a better Go Hard player. So let's just jump right into those. So for our first matchup, we are against Zoe Diana Invoke list. They splash Atrocity with their SI part. But for the purposes of this video, since we are covering more of a when to pass and how to play control deck style, I won't be focusing as much on what their deck is like and more focusing on our game plan. So our hand is kind of awkward. We don't have an aggressive opening such as turn 2 Elise, which, we'd really like in this deck. So we just developed this deck hand here. And we can't really do too much. Now, because his deck also doesn't run any form of interaction apart from some of their invoke cards or atrocity, we can safely take this glimpse here because our turn doesn't look too good, and neither is our hand. We're kind of drawing bricked out here with a triple croaker that doesn't really do too much yet. I think using these croakers for TF is fine, and so we can just choose to bank this 2 spell mana, especially because we can, use it to cast Glimpse Beyond in the following turn. Because our hand state is also kind of poor, we are looking to draw a little bit more aggressively. Now I can play pretty proactively here because their deck doesn't really lack or have many ways to punish our plays, and we're usually not playing anything else this turn. We could have played double croaker, but the draw before the TF kind of doesn't really work out, and this is one of those matchups where we could level TF, so saving the draw for afterwards is a lot better. And so up to this point, there hasn't really been any key decisions that we need to make. So he actually gets a challenger off of his, I think that's from his Solari Priestess. So we need to kind of, get this hand going a little bit. Yeah, it's safely use the croaker on the TF because I know the TF's gonna die this turn, so it doesn't matter if it's at 2 health or 1. He plays Diana here, which probably means he gets another free trade, and I'm actually in a funny position here because I'm the one who needs to be actively spending my mana because at this point I have really bad hands and I can't really be progressing my game state much. So I can pretty aggressively draw with these croakers, and I don't really have any other good use of my mana. And again, because my hand's kind of bricked out, I feel that I can safely take this glimpse here in order to draw a couple more cards. I really need to be hitting, getting my go hard started, and so I'll just glimpse the deckhand so that the Diana kind of doesn't get its free trade here, and just to draw 2 more cards. A thing that you have to be careful with this deck is that you could run into some hand size issues, especially if I have like a level TF on hand. So that's just one thing to watch out for here. I think this is where things get a little interesting. I definitely can't pass in this state, even though I am somewhat the control deck. I'm so behind on board and I haven't progressed my game plan at all. I have to be playing proactively in this position. And now, of course, after I see that he spends all of his mana, I'm pretty free to do what I want, and so I just go wide so I have good blockers against this board. Now, the one way that we can lose against this deck is that if he gets in a lot of face damage and then he atrocities a big unit onto our side, that can, be the one out that their deck has against ours. And so I'm thinking about using the go hard on the destroyer, and so enabling this vengeance. Now, of course, you can still use I could have waited until he tapped under 6 mana for atrocity, but at this point he had a full board and he was probably going to attack with it, so if he had at that point, he probably had it. There's not much we could have done there. And again, this actually looks a little better on board state after this resolves. We have a decent open attack where our 3/3s pretty much threaten to value trade down his board. Another really key thing about Go Hard as a deck is that you can take some really aggressive, or maybe even try to set up some really good open attacks as a way to pass initiative over to our opponent. But that's only a case if you're ahead on board or if you're progressing your game plan in a meaningful way, because if you aren't at a certain point, then the opponent can kind of just pass back to you and you're kind of in the same position even after you attack. He takes some value trades here, but what this does for us is that we can set up this Withering Whale with the Dreadway deckhand on the following turn. Now, of course, we could go for it here. We have 9 mana, meaning that our combo is 7 mana, and we could kind of wipe the board here. But I think that the keg kind of scares him into developing further into his turn and kind of incentivizes an open attack because he doesn't want to play more units into it. So it's very fine to leave the keg on board on this turn, especially because the only way he can interact with it is through Hush. And so, I'm not very afraid to play out my mana here and set up a good whale onto this board. And even at the end of the turn, we net 1 mana positive over our opponent. Now, two things here. I threaten Ruination, and I threaten a bigger whale if our opponent chooses not to open attack. But this is, we actually want him to open attack because we do have this whale, and once this whale is played, if it goes through, and it does, I mean, it definitely does. There's no way. No Hush. Any moment now. Right, so now that the whale goes through, all of a sudden, we've cleared our opponent's board, and now we have a lot of board advantages. So I snap pass, because it's up to our opponent now, because if he passes back, we just open attack and deal 10 damage? 10 damage to our opponent's face. And again, I feel comfortable passing here because a 1-2 isn't challenging this board. He has to play more units in order to prevent this open attack from pretty much winning the game because he goes under a certain life total. Now that he's committed 4 more mana to a unit, I feel comfortable in figuring out what I want to do, and so I just take this rummage. 0 mana Burblefish is pretty good. So he passes again here, and this is a kind of a weird slot because he could have took this Meteor Shower, but he decided to pass, and then that somehow baited me into playing a 6th unit so that he could play Meteor Shower. I guess that's a misplay on both sides, but it was really strange that he didn't play it beforehand. I wasn't really hand reading him at that point very specifically either. We could develop an elusive into this board attack, but this attack doesn't really get too much better. If he plays another unit, he blocks 2 damage, but we get elusive 2 damage. So it's always better to give reactivity to our opponent here because we couldn't develop a better board state in order to go into this attack. And so he chooses his blocks, and it's back to him. It's up to him to play a card. He could pass here, and then I probably wouldn't pass, but that doesn't really help his board state either. He commits 8 mana again to a Phoenix, and so I'm pretty free to develop my board out here. Glimpse Beyond, because he doesn't have much interactivity with my side of the board, I can pretty safely go for these glimpses, cycles, really go through my deck and try to find the missing pieces I need for this win condition. And on the other hand, he doesn't have an open attack because I block out all of his units. And so I feel very much in control here, and I can pretty just safely be efficient with my mana, play out my units, and just make sure that I'm thinking as much spell mana as I can for the following turn. And this turn is where things get a little interesting. So he plays a Solari Sunforger. He threatens to gain 5 health with it, but I take the pass because he doesn't really have a good open attack. Now this Diana actually threatens to challenge the elusive, and then he gets 9 damage into this attack, which starts to get a little bit scary because he could then Pale Cascade into Atrocity to get lethal value. I do funnily enough have this Absorb Soul that would play right around it, but because I've passed and baited him into developing this board, this Ruination actually does a lot. It removes the 5 healing unit from his board, it removes 1 life from the Phoenix, and if he doesn't open attack here with his Phoenix, I have an elusive blocker to deny him of his attack again. So he makes this good read and attacks in, and I can develop, this keg again. But because we were able to pass and wait until he developed a board state in which he could have threatened us, we could then play very reactively with our Ruination in order to get what I would still say is a very favorable position to be in. again, if we can't develop into an better attack, we just take these opens. And if he chooses to block the elusive here, we do have the keg plus go hard, which threatens to kill the phoenix, which is also pretty fine because once he's out of big threats, he doesn't really have a way to win because his deck relies on some of these big celestials into atrocity. And so now that we have a pretty free, soft pass again by using our go hard on his phoenix, and here's the atrocity. But luckily we do have this Withering Wail, which counters this atrocity. If he had a Pale Cascade, we do have the Absorb Soul to kind of avoid the lethal damage there, but he doesn't, and that's obviously really good for us again. He's always, we know he doesn't have the Pale Cascade, so this is a pretty free and clean trade. And now it's just really all about our game plan. He's kind of tapped under, and we still want to be progressing ourselves pretty efficiently. So TF blue card is a pretty simple play here. So we do draw the pack your bags off of the TF blue, get another pack from the top deck. We play Sisters here, and we don't have to play pack just yet, but this rummage pretty much signifies that, it kind of tells the opponent that I do have the pack in my hand. And he committed quite a few resources. The Sisters cost 6, and I deny him the healing here, so this feels pretty comfortable as a pack. If I waited, he could have opened. I don't really have a good block. I guess I could have absorbed sold his attack, which actually kind of seems to be the right play in this moment, funnily enough. But I think at this point we're just so far ahead in our game plan. He's running low on cards. We've pressured him out enough in that I don't think the plays really mattered at this point. But looking back, the key turn was really that deciding to Ruination, and which helped us, and that whale back then with the keg, playing the keg in order to bait him into an open attack, and then the whale to really clear up the board. And now just playing this Ledros is kind of GG. You could have a second Diana, but we already killed one, so it's unlikely. We already know he doesn't have Pale, he doesn't have a blocker for this Ledros, and this should be the end. Yeah. So second game here, we are against, it's a Freljord Overwhelmed deck with Darius. Mulligan's pretty simple, at least TF are pretty key, and developing some early pressure, and of course, TF for the cycle. Kick the other cards, mainly looking for units to play on an early curve. If we have an early curve, we can contest against some of their early aggression. They might play like Omen Hawk and Ruthless Raiders, and just having some units to block those is pretty fine to help us transition into the mid game. Legion Saboteur, it's a pretty quick go hard. These early turns, it's not too much decision making to be had. We could have passed and then see if he wanted to open attack with the 2-1 and kind of deny him his turn 2 play, but I don't think that's correct. He has another one, but this Elise contests this pretty well. And oh baby, a triple! He has all 3 of them, which is kind of nuts. It's actually a pretty good opener if he wasn't actually playing against a go hard deck, but alas, this Elise makes quick work out of one of them, and also gives us a really good open attack, because if he chooses to block, the 1-1 spider with his 2-1, then I'm super happy about it. And this open attack also gives me a 1-1 blocker, where if I had passed initiative somehow, which if I passed, that was never the moment to pass. This open attack to get in gives us this blocker. But here's where things start to get a little bit interesting. He takes an open attack, which is a little strange at first because as his deck, he definitely wants to be developing onto his board for each attack. So committing this pre-attack seems kind of weird when all of my turn 4 plays are just really small minions. but I don't really have a good block in this position. If I block with Elise, he might be representing a Calling Strike or a Troll Chant, and I'd feel kind of bad about that. Of course, on the flip side, on an attack turn, it'd probably be the same position, but you know, on the attack turn, I don't feel so bad about it. I actually set up this keg because I want to bait him into this TF red card, but he passes again, which is really strange. He could either just be really trolling, or he just doesn't have a play. And so either way, I'm kind of confused. So I just soft pass again by taking open attack. Open attacking again is very same as a pass. Of course, you can't develop your board in a further state, but he passes again. This is so weird. His hand must be spells, or he's really wanting to play around this TF red card. But I couldn't necessarily have the read that his hand's all bricked out, and so if I decided to play a minion, he could then, you know, play his own unit and spend his mana. Because he decided to pass, I'd rather burn his mana because he's the one who has to be developing onto board in order to progress his win condition. Although I am burning 5 mana of my own, I think that burning 5 mana of his is much more valuable. And if because his keg is still on board, he's still kind of baited into an open attack. And because if he doesn't, I gotta develop this Twisted Fate, and I can choose a red card. Now, he plays Wolf Rider off the top, so I think there's actually a hand state where his hand was completely bricked out, but, and I kind of just like overthought myself out of, you know, doing the right play. Oh, right play is kind of a wrong word. I think the right play was to pass there, but had I known his hand state 100%, then I definitely should have made a different play. I can sack Twisted Fate pretty easily here. Twisted Fate's worse than Elise on the attack, and I don't really have the ability to level up Twisted Fate with his hand. But now that he is down his mana, I can just develop my board as much as I want. His deck mainly relies on keeping board tempo, and because he doesn't have any of it, I can play as proactively as I want. And so I actually get to level up my Elise here and develop another 2/2 on top of it. And this open attack is looking pretty darn juicy. This is what, 7-9 damage? That pretty much puts him at a kill range of double Doom Beast, TF red card into Doom Beast, or like a pack your bags. He has another Death's Hand, which is probably predictable because of how bricked out his hand state was. But no matter, I don't think it was right to develop into this play. And he passes again, which is, it's so strange. But I don't think I could have passed at that point again. I do have a Vengeance in hand, so if he commits to a line like this, I'm not super worried either. But the way he's passing kind of makes me feel kind of weird. But we have tools to, you know, stop this open aggression if he decides to take an open attack. We do have the Vengeance, etc. So we're pretty comfortable playing a unit there. Now, of course, we could have stopped his Darius from being played that turn by passing again, but then, you know, in the end, it probably would have benefited us, but because we do have this Vengeance in hand, I felt comfortable letting him play Darius this turn. And I have a perfect mana for this TF gold card into this Vengeance, and he commits all of his mana again into this Baron, which means that this open attack should seal the deal. Now, a super strange position because I always thought he was playing around like my keg into like a whale or a TF red card, but in reality his hand was completely bricked out. I kind of made some wrong reads here and there that, you know, cost me some mana on certain turns, but I think that taking those passes is a lot safer of a play. And, you know, I could have denied his Darius play by passing again. But at that point, I weighed the options. If he played Darius here, I had the Vengeance in case he tried to cheese me with some like open attack Battle Fury type of combo, in which that I felt fine developing on a board there. So really you have to think about these pros and cons of each turn, passing aggressively or open attacking aggressively to pass initiative over, and really evaluating whether or not you want to let your opponent play out his mana. So that kind of wraps up the guide here on learning how to play as more control deck and learning how to really take your passes aggressively, either passing at the beginning of a turn or open attacking as kind of like a soft pass to pass initiative back to the opponent. If you found this guide helpful, then please do let me know. I really like to hear some of your feedback on some of these videos, as these are a lot more conceptual and sometimes I'm not the best at explaining everything to you guys. If there are parts that I could have been a little bit more clear about, or if you have any other questions, please feel free to leave a comment down below. Otherwise, if you have any more topics that you would like for me to cover, then also please leave a comment for that as well, and I'd be sure to look into it a little bit more. I do have a few more ideas planned out for some of these series, but I hope that you did enjoy, and I'll see you guys next time.